Welcome back, everybody, for another AoE2DE regular tier list. So, I know I'm working on my campaign tier list. Hopefully, the first part should be launching next week. But I wanted to do one of my old classic tier lists, something that's a bit more free form, me thinking, unscripted, loosey goosey sort of thing. And as you can see here, we are going to be doing unique units because people have requested that one for a while. And, want to make sure that I'm not just doing campaign content, right? And I think, it's going to be a fun discussion. I do have all of the new civs, as in both of them. So we have Coustier in Flemish Militia and Sergeants, and this list happens to be in alphabetical order by unit. So that's what we're going to do. And just before jumping in, well, first, if you do enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like in that area down below and comment and do all that stuff. But just to differentiate between the tiers for our unique units, because obviously each unique unit has to be set in the context of its own civilization, since, you can't be making them across a bunch of different civilizations unless you're one of those that you can, but most of them no. So S tier is going to be obviously the very, very best unique units, and I would say that one, these are either units that you can just go like fast castle into UU for, as it like they're so powerful that they're just defining that your army in either like mid game or in late game or in both. So either the unit's like something you can go for just like right away, or it's a unique unit that's just so powerful that it's a defining, I guess, cornerstone of the civilization's army in most situations in the late game. So those are going to be the very, very best S tier unique units. A tier is a powerful option, and maybe you can go for them, right away. But it's not the only thing that your civilization has, and you'll be seeing certain, decent amount of games where you don't go for the unique unit. B tier, your decent unique units. I would say this is going to be the beginning of the more situational unique units that, like, okay, you'll see them in some matchups, but not in others. But you're still seeing them fairly often. Maybe you only see them in certain map types or whatever. C tier going to be the much more situational unique units, the situations in which you make them, they do arise, but they don't arise very often, and you'll go quite a while without seeing these guys every week or whatever. I don't know where I was going with that. Welcome to the world of unscripted Ornlu. And then, of course, finally, D tier are the bad unique units, ones that you will very, 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 very rarely, if ever, see, because they're just bad for whatever reason. So, with all that rambling aside, we have a lot of unique units to get through, and so we're going to try and do our very best to do this quickly, see how successful that is. But starting off with everyone's favorite, the Arambai. Burmese unique unit, obviously, the dart throwy guy. They were changed not too long ago. But I'm still going to put them in S tier just because they're such a cornerstone of the Burmese army. Especially with the civ that kind of lacks a very good archery range because it's in fact really bad. Arambai represent just a very important tool that Burmese have, and you're just seeing these guys most of the time. They're insanely powerful when massed. No, they can't be nuking buildings anymore, and the whole double castle Arambai strategy is nowhere near as good as it used to be. But it can still work, in certain situations, and the new sort of like, it's kind of like they deal splash damage almost if you have enough of them. And those guys can absolutely wreck, clumped up units like infantry and archers. So I'd still say it's an S tier UU. Oh, also, I'm not like differentiating within the tiers. Like I'm just putting them down in order. Anyway, Ballista Elephants for Khmer, opposite end. It's probably the single worst unique unit in the game. Well, maybe not the worst, but definitely one of them. They're useful almost exclusively for their gimmick where they can cut forests. That's it. For all intents and purposes, the units could have 0 combat stats, and they would see almost exactly the same amount of play in competitive settings, at reasonably high levels. They're so expensive, and they're just like worse scorpions. They deal very little damage, and like they trade tankiness. Like they're obviously quite tanky, but they miss the range of scorpions and the damage. And with Khmer, you usually have the meat shield of like your elephants or whatever, maybe some halberdiers or even hussars. They're just almost always better options for Khmer, unless you're using them for that specific tree cutting gimmick, but that's like, that's not even like using the unit, right? You know what I mean. Berserks. I haven't thought of this list ahead of time. I'm thinking B tier, but it would be a strong B tier. So, obviously the Viking unique unit are one of them, and it's a good infantry, especially in Imperial Age. Once it's fully upgraded, it can regenerate HP. It has 2 melee armor with the elite variant. They're reasonably fast. They have, good HP, good attack, just a great all-purpose infantry. The reason that I wouldn't put them in A tier is that they're really, really bad in mid-game. You really want to be getting that elite upgrade, as Castle Age Berserks are kind of about as good as Longswordsmen, but also more expensive. Yeah, not the greatest unit ever. Remember that without the elite upgrade, they have 0 melee armor, and then with the elite upgrade, they have 2 melee armor. They get 14 attacks, so they actually get 1 more attack once you then champions, like compared to the swordsman line, whereas Castle Age Berserks, I believe, are the exact same as a longswordsman. So, yeah, definitely a very good late game infantry unit for Vikings, but not really something that you can use really at all in the mid game, as it's just too hard to get them up and running. So, yeah, that's why it's going to be in B tier. Boyar, C tier. Boyar Slav unique unit. It's a, very heavy cavalry unit, but they are very expensive and hard to get up and running. 80 gold a pop, I believe. You get extra melee armor, and the melee armor is very good against melee units that aren't counter cavalry units. The problem is, most of the time what you're up against with melee units are counter cavalry units, i.e. halberdiers, camels, elephants, that whole sort of thing. So yeah, they're great against swordsmen, and they're great against other like heavy cavalry, but they are a little bit slower. They do have 3 pierce armor in Imperial Age, which is really good, and if you can get them up and running, they're going to be really good. They're definitely going to be better than Cavalier, and in Castle Age, they're definitely better than Knights. It's just, they're too slow to get up and running for most games, especially since Slavs have access to fully upgraded Cavalier, fully upgraded Hussar. Usually those are going to be more attractive options in all but the most drawn-out team games. Camel Archers. S tier. These units are insane. Obviously, Berber unique unit, one of them, and it's a cavalry archer that has bonus damage against cavalry archers. That aspect, like in some situations, it is very useful. Like if you're up against units that are classified as cavalry archers, like a Rambai, for instance, you are getting that bonus damage, and you are feeling pretty good about life, especially now that cavalry archers are more common. But honestly, just as a general purpose unit, it's got really strong stats. 7 base attack in Castle Age is massive. I mean, that's more than Cav archers, that's more than almost every single archer unit at that stage is the same attack as a guard tower. So you're dealing, 3 damage to mangonels with Bodkin Arrow, which is pretty darn awesome. And then, even in Imperial Age, you can get Magrebi Camels to slowly regenerate, and you just get such great long-term, gold value, and it's going to be like the core of the Berber late-game army. If you compare them to something like Mangudai, they're obviously not as good against siege, and their base attack, like their damage per second isn't as high, but they're still just such a strong unit. Even have a little bit better armor than Mangudai. So yeah, definitely I would still say a good S tier unique unit. Caravels. I'm going to put them in B tier. It's going to be kind of weird rating these water unique units, but when you're looking at the Caravel, it gets up to B tier because Vikings exist, and Caravels are amazing at killing longboats. And they're amazing in like these really late game-y, drawn-out water sorts of games that I predict that we will be seeing plenty of in Hidden Cup, which is coming up. So yeah, like Caravels, they're very situational in that they are only good in mass, and then they're really only good against longboats or regular galleons if you really get the masses that you need. But they're just awful against fire ships. They're just dreadful against fire ships. So if you're against a civ like Byzantines or a civ like Italians who can use the power spikes that their age up bonus and whatnot give you, yeah, caravels can really be underwhelming, and it's not something you're going to want to go for all the time with Portuguese, but it's like in those situations where you want to go for caravels, they can be really good. Cataphracts. Whew. I'm tempted to honestly put them in A tier. And the reason I'm going to do this over B tier is because, yes, they're slow to get up and running, and it's not like Byzantines can do that every game, but Byzantines are a civ that they usually are slow. You know, you usually go for late game with Byzantines. And the thing with Cataphracts is, like, once you get them up and running, they are almost impossible to counter well unless you're a civ that has very strong ranged options. And some civs just completely die to Cataphracts. So the fact that they aren't impossible to get to. You can get to them, especially after their elite upgrade and Logistica were cheapened a little while back. I do think that they're just such a powerful unit that really has no comparison within the Byzantine army, or really most any army, that I do think that they will slot into A tier, even if they are going to be one of the slower unique units out there in terms of getting up and running. But of course, like I said, Byzantines are a civ that are fine slow rolling it. So yeah, Cataphracts, they're going to make their way into A tier. Chuko Nu, S tier. It's just an absolutely insane unit. It does so much damage, and is like, it's the reason that Chinese can have a very powerful late game against every civ that doesn't have siege onagers. And they just deal so much damage. They're fairly cheap. And Castle Age, they're good. Imperial Age, Post-Imperial Age, they're good as well. Just a very, very strong, high damage archer unit that are also going to be performing better against siege units due to their rapid fire attack. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I don't need to sell you guys on Chuko Nu. Condottiero. This is not a Huscarl, it's the Condottiero. That one's the Huscarl. Alphabetically, remember. I'm gonna put them in C tier. You don't see them all that often. You mostly just see them on water maps where you're going for a landing. And they are good in that situation, but their anti-gunpowder aspect is not that amazing. And they are very expensive for the stats that you're getting. Italians do get them with Pavisa now, so they get some extra armor, which is nice. But it's still a very situational unit. Not one I think that you're going to see all that often. Even if you're in situations like in team games, sometimes even Cavalier landings are going to be better. I mean, the fact that you don't need upgrades to get them, like you don't need to get the swordsman line upgrades, and they are quite quick. Like maybe they can be pushing B tier, but I still don't think, I still think Berserks and Caravels are stronger in their respective circumstances. So I'd say it's probably going to be like the high end of C tier, but still going to be C tier. Conquistadors, S tier. Are we seeing a trend with these ranged unique units that have a lot of attack? And 3 of the 4 are also mounted. Conquistadors are the reason that Spanish are a viable civ ever in any way. Yes, they do take bonus damage from skirmishers now, or extra bonus damage rather. But yeah, Conquistadors are still like so incredibly strong against melee units and even ranged units if they're not completely prepared. They can snipe mangonels. I would say that they're probably the lowest, S tier unit so far. Just because they kind of fall off in Imperial Age, whereas these 3 don't. Just because they have a very slow attack rate and are somewhat inaccurate, but still. Fast Castle Conquistadors can just completely wreck you on a variety of different settings. Team games, 1v1s. Arabia, Arena, Nomad, BF, anything like that. The Coustier, Burgundian unique unit. Oh boy. I'm gonna put them in B tier. They used to be like easiest S tier in the world, but they did get quite heavily nerfed. They lack the ability to one-shot a lot of stuff now, which really hampers their, power, as they're just such a weird unit. I'm not a fan of the charge mechanic. But they still can be quite strong in the right circumstances, and I think the most important thing is that they're very cheap. They're 55 food, 55 gold. That is not at all bad. And you get a bunch of these up and running, and you can definitely do a lot of damage with them. So they are easier to get up and running than most cavalry unique units. They probably aren't as good, like in terms of like per unit value, but still, they're pretty darn good, I would say. Elephant Archer, D tier. I do think they're better than the Ballista Elephants, and the situations where you'd want to go for Elephant Archers are probably more common than the ones you'd want to go for Ballista Elephants, at least as a combat unit. But they're still just so slow. They're so expensive. They don't have the highest attack in the world. They're super tanky. They are tankier than Ballista Elephants because you can get like Parthian tactics and stuff like that for them. But yeah, they're just not something you're going to want to go for in most situations. Some situations, yes, but most, no. Flaming Camels are a meme. Yeah, they are dumb. Yeah, D tier. Flemish Militia. This is a really weird one. I'm going to put it in D tier simply because of the way you have to get them. You have to get them only after you research Flemish Revolution, which means you can only get them in post-imp. And yes, they can completely destroy an enemy who is completely unprepared for them. And they are very good units, right? But it's like, I have seen Flemish Revolution work once in an MBL game. And I've seen it not work at least like 10 or 11 times. It's not a good tech. You are losing almost always when you get it. And then even the fact that you can make them from town centers is very hard to like justify a lot of the times, because you need town centers to be making villagers after you've turned your entire economy into Flemish militia. So like, I would say if you could just like create this from the castle, I would say it's probably, like a decent, B tier unique unit. But just the way that you get them, they're just so situational that you'd ever see them. Gebetto. I'd say B tier. It's not a bad unique unit. I think they're actually a little underrated since they got their frame delay buff, kind of similar to like what Cav Archers got. They do a ton of damage. Obviously, they're very fragile, but if you think of them as like a high-powered archer unit that you use as like a supporting sort of thing, they can do a lot of work with any sort of meat shield, with Malians having, their champions or their cavalry as a meat shield unit. I do think this is probably an underexplored unit overall, and a very important part of the Malian late game, as they do a lot of damage, obviously. But they're still very, very fragile, right? That's always been their biggest problem. But of course, the melee damage means you can, if you have good micro, you can deal with like mangonels and stuff, reasonably well. I think it's a solid unit, honestly. The Janitor, oh boy. Honestly, I'm gonna put them in B tier too. Not as like a team unit. I guess I'm thinking maybe C tier. Yeah, maybe B tier is a little too generous. Just because like a lot of the unit design is that they're a team unit. There's almost no situation where you'd ever want to make Genitors in a team game. Orderly Aztecs, they can make cavalry units. Yeah, I mean, memes aside, it's a 1v1 unit, and it's a pretty good one, honestly. Like, Genitors are pretty darn solid as a, tankier, more expensive, fast skirmisher. But a lot of the times, Berbers are going to be going for other things anyway. There are the situations where you can go for them, but I think especially because they're kind of like sort of designed as a team unique unit. Yeah, I want to put them in B tier, but I feel like I have to put them in C tier. Genoese Crossbowmen. I would actually say A tier. It's a really good unit, especially since they've gotten a few buffs over the course of history. And now they even train faster. And I'm putting them in A tier because Italians like halberdier, it's their best way to deal with cavalry. And then you get this sort of, they're honestly kind of like cataphracts in that they're good against this sort of unit that normally counters them. Like, cavalry generally counters archers, right? But genbows counter cavalry. And once you get enough of these up and running, like, civs that are reliant on cavalry just have no way to possibly compete with you. And they're, like, a very scary force to, deal with. They aren't the most general purpose archers in the world due to their lacking of 5 range, but they're still really, really strong, and they're not that hard to get up and running, nowadays at least. So honestly, I think they earn a spot in A tier. As kind of like Cataphracts, they can just be so tough to deal with. Huskarl, S tier. You know, it's the reason that Goths exist. Certain civs just struggle so much to deal with these guys. Cavalry civs and archer civs and cav archer civs can just really struggle to deal with the Huskarl plus Halb combo. The two units just complement each other so well that, yeah, it can be a really big issue to deal with them in a lot of cases. And just in the context of Goths with all of those infantry bonuses, yeah, they're just so insane. Imp Camels. I probably would have said S tier before their recent nerf, but I'm probably going to put them in A tier now. It's mostly a team game unit. You can see them sometimes in 1v1s, and they are better heavy camels, right? But now they miss, relatively speaking, 1 melee armor and 1 pierce armor, which really kind of hampers them a lot. But still, Indian Pocket in team game is no laughing matter, and if you're a civ like Huns or Franks or something like that, maybe even Lithuanians, you can really struggle to deal with these guys, but I'd still say that they are more situational than a unit like the Huskarl. But still, you know, a very strong unit for sure. Imp Skirm. You're probably going to be seeing them more than Genitours, so I'm going to put them in B tier. You're still going to never want to make this thing in a team game, because you almost never want to be making skirmishers in team games. But 1v1s for Vietnamese, these are really beastly units. I mean, they're like super mega skirmishers, and it's one of the reasons Vietnamese have just such a top tier late game in 1v1s. Just really, really good unit at what it does. Obviously, the unit isn't individually all that great, but it's a trash unit, right? That's kind of part of the whole point of it. Jaguars. B tier. Would have put them in C tier before they got that creation speed buff, but now that they have that creation speed buff, definitely think they're a solid B tier unit. The situation where you want to make them does not arise all the time, as Aztecs are already a very strong infantry civ, but also they're usually making Eagle Warriors or Pikemen, things that swordsmen are good against, and then, you know, they start making swordsmen, and then you start making Jaguar Warriors, and then the swordsman player is very, very, very sad. That, like, these guys just destroy infantry, it's not even close. But still, I would say it's a little bit too situational for me to put any higher, and they are a little on the expensive side, too. Janissaries. I'm jumping between A tier and S tier. Yeah, I think if I can justify putting the Conquistador in S tier, I can justify putting the Janissary in S tier, although I would say it's probably towards the bottom. The fact that they have 8 range in Castle Age, as well as like a massive base attack, means that, again, a lot of civs are really going to struggle to deal with that. Mangonels are a very suspect counter because Janissaries outrange them and have just such high base attack. And in late game, I would say they're probably a little bit better than Conquistadors, as they do have higher base attack and more range. But they still are quite fragile, and good archers can certainly make short work of Janissaries. So they're a little bit more situational in late game, but especially in mid game against a lot of civs, like especially on a closed map like Arena or Black Forest or Hideout or something. These guys can absolutely just destroy stuff and just chill beneath bombard towers and whatnot. So very, very powerful unit. Kamayuk. A tier. I think pretty easily. These guys are insane. They, like, you don't want to make them in all situations. Like, they are still not very good against archers, but they annihilate almost all sorts of melee units because of their ability to poke over each other's shoulders. If you've ever tried to make using like a bunch of swordsmen or something to run into these Kamayuks, the Kamayuks will actually just destroy the swordsmen. And of course, like versus cavalry, it's like, yeah, obviously cavalry get completely wrecked. So I think it's actually an incredibly strong unit for the Incas. It's just Incas rarely get to that stage in the game because they're too busy villager rushing everybody. So that is what it is, but I still think it's going to be a strong A tier option here. Karambits. C tier. I don't think they're D tier. Probably a little undervalued, I would say. Because these guys just running amok everywhere can ruin your day, and they are very easy to get up and running. But yeah, They do have to compete with Trash Two-Handed Swordsman, and Karambits do cost gold. Not much gold, but they do cost gold. So it's not the easiest thing in the world to justify, and they get completely wrecked by just strong units. So, you know, it's a situational unit, right? Like all these, but not that bad. But obviously not amazing. Keshik, A tier. Pre-nerf, I would have said S tier. Now they're a little bit more expensive on the food cost, which is pretty inhibiting in like mid game, but they are still like an insane unit. You're getting a unit that's like equivalent to a knight or cavalier at a massive discount, and you also get the gold trickle, so you're getting even more of a discount. They're faster than knights. They do attack slower, but they're just an insane unit for the Tatar army. Just really, really strong unit overall, I would say. You're going to be using these guys a lot if you're playing a lot of Tatars. No reason not to. Chop Kicks. Kipchoks. I'm also going to put them in A tier, simply because they just fall off so much in Imperial Age. Like, humans, if you snowball in, like, Castle Age with a bunch of Kipchoks, then you, like, push an Imperial and you already have, like, 50 Kipchoks, then yeah, they're going to feel unbeatable. But trust me, I've tried, and I've seen it tried. You can't transition into Kipchoks in like, mid to late game. Like, if you open Cavalry and you need to, like, add in a ranged unit, like, adding in Kipchoks it's really, really underwhelming due to Cumin's missing Bracer. It's like the unit's like shooting Nerf darts or whatever in Imperial Age if you don't already have like 50 of them, which you can certainly do. Like, they're still a really, really strong unit, right? But I don't think they're quite as good as these S tier units. So look at this distribution so far. I did not plan any of this, so looking good so far. Konniks, A tier as well, actually. Konniks are good. They are a little bit sluggish feeling compared to knights, especially against ranged units, but they have a lot of attack, and they are also a lot more resilient to pikemen, obviously. They are a bit weaker against monks, because if the Konnik gets converted, the dismounted Konnik will also be with the converted player. But I think a big thing that's pushing them up to A tier is that it's a lot easier to make them than most unique units, because you can build them from Kreposts, which are easier to spam than castles, and with stirrups they become super amazing as well. So I think like they're a good all-around cavalry unit for Bulgarians. I think they're just a good all-around civ, honestly. Latus! Would have put them in S tier before. Now I'm probably going to put them in B tier. Lacking Pierce Armor is a really big issue for a unit. Like, that's supposed to be a heavy cavalry-ish sort of thing. Like, yeah, they can do a ton of damage, but a lot of the time you would rather be having heavy cavalry. It's like, you would rather have, like, you know, your Nightline against ranged units, and you'd rather have Latus by, like, a little bit against melee units, but I would say it's more important to be better against ranged units by a little bit. So, like, overall, I think that Knights are a bit more versatile, especially since you can make them from stables, whereas Latus are obviously stuck behind a castle, and the relic bonus benefiting both obviously makes them just a little bit more situational. I'd say it's definitely a high B tier unit, but still going to be in B tier. Longboats, S tier. Longboats are amazing. They're insane, and they make every civ that doesn't have caravels very sad in late game. Like, these guys stack up so well, and you know, they're nimble. They're quick to train. They are quick to move. And they're obviously good. They're not like great, but they're a lot better against fire ships than our regular galleys, which means that they're good against a unit that's supposed to counter them, kind of like these two guys. But I would say that these guys are even more generally useful. And like I said, unless you're against Portuguese, you're probably making these most of the time as Vikings, and especially in team game water maps, it's like these things are bonkers. Longbowmen. Maybe A tier, maybe B tier. I'm really on the fence for this. Like, they're good units, right? It's just, they're only a slight upgrade over the Archer line. But they, like, you can still get them up and running, and they're still going to be, like, really, really good. Yeah, let's put them in A tier. I do think that it's probably like going to be the lowest A tier entry, and if you think that they should be in B tier, I probably won't think you're insane. But you know, longbowmen, they're good, right? They're archers, but a little bit better. I don't think it's the most interesting unique unit from a design concept, but they're certainly very fun to play with, and they can be a nightmare to deal with their 12 range. Having the higher base attack and the pierce armor in an Imperial Age is also quite nice. So yeah, it was probably the lowest of the A tier selection, but still going to be a very strong unique unit in late game for Britons. Magyar Hussar. Oh boy, this is an interesting one. B tier, but like very, very high B tier. Like kind of like the latest, I guess. If you put them in A tier, I probably wouldn't think you're insane. But like the thing is, you almost never going to want to make these guys in team games because you'd just rather make paladins. In 1v1s, they're insane in late game, but you need to be getting those upgrades. You need to be getting Corvinian army before they are a trash unit, as in they don't cost gold. And like in that case, they are amazing, but how often do you really find yourself in those situations? All the time if you are me, but if you're a regular player, then not all that often, I would say. Still, like they can be amazing, but I still think they're just a little too situational. Kind of like Jags. Mamelukes. D tier, unfortunately. I love Mamelukes. They're so fun. They're too expensive, though. They're too expensive for what you're getting. So they probably could use a little bit of a buff. Like, I know they've gotten a bunch of buffs, but they're still just so expensive, man. I think they do benefit. Yeah, they do 100% benefit from the recent Saracen change, where they get plus 10 HP for their camel units. Like, they shifted some of the effect of zealotry to being a civ bonus. But it's still harder to get them up, get them going, and as Saracens, you also have access to very strong camels, so it's like you're making the camel most of the time. I have a great camel impression, by the way, in case you never noticed. Mangudai walked into a bar and there's no counter. I don't think I really need to talk about justifying these in S tier. Missionaries, they're really, really bad. Making them is never more than a meme. Yeah. Nice and easy. A couple easy ones right there. Organ gun. Yeah, I'm gonna put them in B tier because again, I think they're a little too situational. Like in some situations, organ guns are like the most oppressive unit in the world because they just kill everything. But in a lot of other situations, they just kind of die to everything, and it's a lot about if they're masked up. If you mask them up enough, then they really are not going to be countered by anything. But in lower numbers, they're countered just by having a lot of some sort of strong archer or cavalry unit or siege unit, It's a tricky unit. It's a very tricky unit. But the lack of mobility is definitely an issue, and I definitely don't think I can justify putting them in A tier. Plumes, S tier. I know they were nerfed. Hera might think they're bad. I don't know if he still thinks they're bad. But yeah, they're still insane. Especially now that we have Obsidian Arrows, thankfully, thrown into the dumpster. Plumed Archers are definitely going to be seeing more play now. They already are seeing more play now, and they're just as strong as they've always been. They're still cheap, they're still fast, they're still tanky, they still do what they gotta do. Rattans. They are quite expensive. And they don't have the speed of Plumed Archers or the HP, but they are, like, really, really tanky. I'm putting them in A tier, although again, it's one of those situations where if you think that they're S tier, I think you can justify it. It's just in my mind, going Fast Castle Rattan Archers does not feel as powerful as going Fast Castle Plumed Archers, and the two are very comparable units, right? So I'm going to put them in A tier. More of a late game unit probably than a mid game unit, but still, they're still quite good. Don't get me wrong. Samurai. Do I have to put them in C tier? I feel like I kind of have to put them in C tier. I don't want to put them in C tier, but because supplies exists, like Samurai are 60 food and 30 gold. With supplies, swordsmen are 45 food and 20 gold. Like, the swordsman line are way cheaper. Yes, they are slower. Yes, they don't attack quite as fast, but they also get more bonus damage against eagle warriors, which is like a big thing that you're using. The samurai bonus damage versus unique units is very, very rarely applicable. They are still going to be a more population efficient unit than the champion, but the fact that I'm even having to make this like weighing in my head feels like I kind of have to put them in C tier, although they are probably going to be near the top of C tier. Sergeant's C tier, it's not very good. It's only saved from D tier by the fact that they can build donjons, which is pretty sick, and you can get them in Feudal Age. If you think that the unit is insane because it has a high armor, it's very slow and doesn't have much attack, and it's overall not that great of a unit. I've done a lot of testing with this. I've played with Sergeants a lot. And if you think that they're OP because of First Crusade, well, now First Crusade got nerfed, right? So they're just kind of an underwhelming unit all around. I mean, it feels weird putting Sergeants and Samurai in the same tier list, but yeah, like, Samurai are definitely better than Sergeants, but I don't think Sergeants are quite D tier, just because as Sicilians, you are making Sergeants a lot, but that's also kind of because you don't really have a whole lot that's better. So, I mean, for the Sergeant, Coustier, and I guess Flemish Militia, like, these are probably very likely to change, as Burgundians and Sicilians are likely going to be getting a lot more balance changes than other civs, just because they're newer. But yeah, I think that Sergeant's probably C tier. Homestretch. Shotel C tier. They are very, very situational. They are really good in those sorts of situations. They are great against Eagle Warriors. They're great against as like a panic anti-ram unit, but they're very, very expensive. And they're very, very flimsy, so it's a tricky unit to make work. They do have their situations where they do work really well, but I don't really think I can justify putting them higher than C tier. Slingers. B tier. Again, it's kind of like one of those situational units. It's an anti-infantry unit. How often are you going infantry against Incas? I mean, like Eagle Warriors, you make infantry to deal with Eagle Warriors, then you make Slingers to deal with the infantry, kind of like with the Jaguar Warrior. And yeah, I would say that it's actually very comparable to the Jaguar Warrior in terms of how often and likely you are to go for it. Solid unit, it's not gonna shake the world though. Tarkins, A tier, for the sole reason that you can make them from stables, and they're pretty good. Like, they're a solid unit, they're 60 gold, so they're cheaper than our knights, and they have super high pierce armor, and they have the bonus damage versus building, which is really sick. And yeah, like, if you've ever used these guys against archers, they can feel really, really great, because they can also snowball a game super hard because they do destroy buildings very well. But they're definitely not good enough to be like an S tier UU. Still a good solid one. Teutonic Knights, C tier. Again, we're looking at one of those very situational units, but in those situations they are amazing, but it's still a very situational unit. Most of the time, you're fine going for halberdiers, but, they can still do work in the right situation, and they're fun, of course. Throwing axemen. Ooh. I'm gonna put them in B tier, but again, it's gonna be a really high B tier, and if you put them in A tier, I'm not gonna say you're insane. The big thing with Throwing Axemen is that they complement Paladins so well, just heavy cavalry, because, the classic situation, Frank player makes cavalry, enemy makes pikemen, you make Throwing Axemen, they kill the pikemen, the cavalry kills everything else. But they aren't an incredibly strong unit on their own, and they will die super hard to archers, or even just, like, good cavalry units. So they do need protection. They aren't, like, the fastest or strongest unit in the world. But they can be very, very powerful. Cheap Frank castles make them also a bit easier to train. So, like, they're solid, but I wouldn't say they're ever going to be, like, the core of your army, at least not most of the time. Turtle ships, S tier, easy peasy now. C tier probably. Should I say B tier? Nah, C tier. They're very expensive. They're very slow, but they do hit super, super hard. And they can do really well versus fire ships. They are maybe a little bit weaker to demo ships, Short range and slow speed is always going to be a bit of an issue, but they are incredibly tanky. And in the sorts of water maps where you can't move very far, turtle ships can be very strong. Also, water maps where it's like water is kind of like a side thing, like a coastal or something like that, or even a nomad. Turtle ships in low numbers obviously wreck face, so yeah. War elephants, also C tier. Again, like, they are the ultimate unit. They are, they have the highest stats of any unit in the game. They're also the most expensive non-siege unit in the game. You'll see them in insanely long games, but I mean, Team Game Arena, Team Game Black Forest, War elephants aren't that uncommon of a sight. So, I mean, they're definitely not D tier, but I'm not putting them any higher than C tier. War wagons, they're actually going in S tier. I think war wagons are absolutely insane in both mid-game and in late game, and of course they're cheaper now because of the Korean wood discount, and they also get the free armor upgrades, which is insane. They are one of the single most cost-efficient units in the game in like most stages. They are just a little bit clunky to use, and that's really their only issue. They're a little bit clunky, but still like an absolutely beastly unit. And last, but certainly not least, is going to be the Woad Raider. Woad Raiders, I think, are very similar to Berserks, actually, kind of ending similar to where we started. They're really underwhelming in mid-game. Like, the Castle Age Woad Raiders are really, really, really bleh. But of course, in late game, these guys will just tear apart, everything, kind of like Berserks. So, yeah, that's our tier list, guys. That's a surprisingly even distribution, and we got, like, half the unique units are I guess almost half the unique units are in S tier or A tier. And that's always great to see. Unique units are one of the things that makes Age of Empires fun, right? These are almost always going to be some of the most fun units you can be making with any civilization. And yeah, definitely was fun to make this tier list, fun to talk about just how we sort of perceive unique units and maybe how we should use them. And definitely let me know what your favorite unique unit is in the comments below. And hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next time.